Hey everyone, and happy Friday. Ethan with Planned Right here. First off, enjoy the Mickey ears. It's my daughter's birthday tomorrow, and she's been a big fan of Mickey and especially Minnie Mouse, of course, over the past little bit. She's turning 4 tomorrow, and she has her birthday party here in a couple of hours, and she wanted me to wear this, and I did. She thought it was kind of embarrassing, so I keep wearing it to bug her. So I told her I'm not taking it off all day, so don't mind the Mickey ears. Anyways, what I wanted to talk about a little bit today is, well, insulation. So insulation in your home, especially your new build, and how important it really is. So obviously, us here in the valley, I mean, anywhere with extreme hot or cold, we all understand it's common sense how important insulation is, how well your home is insulated. Now, what I want to go over more are different methods of insulation. So I'm not going to go into any crazy, interesting, unique forms of insulation per se. I'm more going to cover the typical insulation you see in most tract homes and what you're going to see in some higher end homes, or some homes where they really care about insulation, for the one I have pulled up, for example. So first off, to talk about insulation a little bit, the standard or code here in Maricopa County here in Arizona is for exterior walls to be at a minimum R13. R13 is like 3.5, 4 inches of like standard fiberglass bats insulation, the big pink stuff you slap in the wall. So that's R13. R38 is what's required above the ceiling. So ceiling or under the roof deck, we can talk about that as well. So those are code minimum. Now R38 really isn't too bad actually. That code changed some time back, but I mean homes back before the 80s, they would have a lot less than that. I think code back then was R11 or R13. It was really low and above the ceiling. I mean lower than what it is for the walls now. I just finished up a plan set for an awesome client that is as patient as can be. We had to figure out and get pretty creative with his insulation because we were doing an addition on the home. It wasn't anything crazy. We're adding on a couple hundred square feet or so, a bedroom, and extending out the living room. And the plan initially was to add a mini split to the bedroom, and then we were hoping that there was enough juice to cover the living room from the existing unit. They had just replaced that unit. They knew the unit was oversized for their square footage. However, they had essentially, basically no insulation in the house. It was really bad. They had R13 bats put up against the roof deck, and they had a second floor. The roof itself rests on the plates of the first floor. So the first floor ceiling, basically the roof is sitting there. And then coming up at a pretty sharp peak, and in the middle, or the top, of course, was a second floor. So they had the kind of their master suite across the second floor, and then that area up there had the really thin insulation across the roof deck or underneath the roof, so not on the ceiling itself. So they had basically less than a third of what the minimum code is. At the time it passed, when the house was built, but it's been a while. So they've been dealing with an oversized unit pushing real hard all the time, still not even getting close to cooling their upstairs. So they had 2 portable AC units upstairs. They have just kind of dealt with it and didn't care that much because again they've been dealing with it for years. But we did run into an issue, and this is here in Queen Creek. We ran into an issue. Queen Creek came back and said we need proof that that existing unit can handle the addition, which first off, I don't get that back very often. Usually if we're just adding in 100 square foot something or other and tying to the existing, it's never an issue for permitting. Queen Creek wanted to be more specific on this one, and at the end of the day, for the client's sake, I'm glad they were more specific, or they wanted more, because the client's going to be a lot happier now. We ended up working closely with a mechanical engineer that I know well. Great guy, Michael from Relative Heating and Cooling, located out in South Carolina, does my calculations for me. And he, after running a ton of numbers, multiple visits, figuring out what they had versus what we can add on, figured out the best thing we can do is add in a bunch of blown-in insulation up above the ceiling that we could get in there, and then we were going to have the new mini split not only feed the new bedroom but also the living room. What that essentially is going to do is it brings the whole house right up to code, and they are going to be so much happier now. They're not going to need their portable units that they have on the second floor unless they want to use them, because the whole house should keep its temperature as intended. So anyways, a little bit of a tangent there, but just wanted to explain how big of a difference good insulation in your home really can make. Again, this is kind of common sense. I think we mostly all know this. So let's back up a little bit here and let's talk about different forms of insulation. So first off, on your roof. So above the ceiling, like I had said earlier, here in Maricopa County, and this can vary where you're located. It's as low as R30, you can be R49 in some very cold areas. That R value, the higher that number is, the better the insulation is, right? So R38 is fairly thick a lot of the time. For example, if you're using standard blown-in insulation, the cellulose thick gray stuff you see on most ceilings, about a foot of that is around, I believe, R30 or so. R30 to R38. Yeah, 16 inches would be closer to that like R49 number. So it gets pretty thick. I mean, we're talking deep, and those of you that have been up in your attic, especially any sort of newer build, you might have this already in there, and you've probably seen how thick that is. The stuff does a great job. There are some annoyances with running blown-in insulation. For example, our house has that, and I put in a surround sound about a year back or so in our house, and when I was installing the speakers up into the ceiling and running the wiring, it was a bit of a pain digging through the cellulose and knowing that I was displacing all that had been put up there and messing up our insulation. So that is a downside, is once it's in there, you kind of don't want to touch it, and if you do, you usually need to get it fixed, and it's a mess. But again, very, very good insulation, good for the price, and insulation, it doesn't obviously just help with temperature in your AC bill, but it helps with sound deadening as well. So that's really nice. Makes the house sound, it's not as tinny, hollowy with good insulation. You're not hearing as much coming through the exterior walls especially. So, so that's pretty typical up above, is that blown-in insulation on these standard track homes. Ours, it was a spec track home done by a builder who is a standard builder that cheaps out in every corner possible. So bare minimum cellulose up top, if that, and well, before I go into the walls, let's just talk about the roof. So roof insulation, we have blown-in cellulose. You can do blown-in fiberglass as well. Fiberglass is not as good as cellulose. It's cheaper, so very appealing for a lot of people. Cellulose is just, it's an extra like 25% better, the R value on average, than fiberglass, so cellulose versus fiberglass. And it's not too much more, so it usually makes more sense to go cellulose. And a big reason too is sometimes you only have so much space. You have these space constraints, and if that's the case, then it makes more sense to go with a higher R value insulation, even if it costs a bit more, because even if the 20 inches of fiberglass was cheaper, you may not be able to fit 20 inches, so you need to go with a better R value cellulose. Take a drink, sorry. So blown-in cellulose is usually the way to go if you're insulating on top of the ceiling. Now, there are two different methods of insulating the roof other than just the material. You have a ventilated attic space or a non-ventilated. Non-ventilated is absolutely the way to go if you can do it, because what that does is you're essentially encasing the full roof deck, the full envelope of the home, in insulation. So instead of having an air-conditioned space from floor to ceiling, you now have an air-conditioned space from floor to the roof deck. So roof deck, when I'm talking about that, I'm just saying that's the bottom of the roof, right? When you're looking up past the trusses, the flat you see, that's the roof deck. So that is a great way to go, because now you're insulating the attic space, or air conditioning essentially the attic space. You're not putting vents into there, but it's still maintaining a lower temperature. What's really nice about that is if you're storing stuff up there long term, you don't have to worry about anything that could get damaged from heat. I mean, we get our attics into the low to mid hundreds Fahrenheit. It's hot here. And so to be able to keep that temperature down to 80s in summer, that's pretty amazing. And on top of that, it's great for longevity on your air conditioning unit up there. You don't have to insulate all the ducting up in the attic for the AC unit, because the whole place is insulated already. So that's another benefit as well, is it'll keep your air conditioning running hopefully longer. At least the air handler and ducting, you're going to have less problems up above. So that's a great way to go. I'm a huge fan of that if you can swing it. That does generally cost a bit more because it doesn't usually use blown-in. There are methods of doing blown-in insulation against the roof deck by using some netting and whatnot. It's not great. It's not very common. Generally, it's done by bats. So bats, if you've seen before, let's just grab a picture. Well, actually, I should have been showing pictures. First off, here's blown-in cellulose, right? Like I was talking about. Lots of people have it. Pretty standard. Let's show you bats fiberglass. So bats fiberglass looks like these. You guys have probably seen them in your walls or in pictures somewhere. This stuff they'll put against the roof deck as well to help insulate, and they They have bat cellulose. It's not very common. I think there's only a few companies that really offer that. Again, not as common. Usually, if you're going with a better insulation as bats, which are these panels that you can DIY and take those and drop them in. You don't need a big blower to blow in the insulation. You can use this is DIY. So you have fiberglass, and then on the other side you've got rock wool usually, or or mineral rock, which is like looks more like this. It's a gray. I'll just look up rock wool and show you. So rock wool is kind of like fiberglass for cellulose. It's better R value, a bit more expensive, but does a better job. So it looks more like this when it's dropped in. This stuff is also great up against the ceiling. Now, downside with using bats up against the roof deck alone is you have to go really thick. There's usually not a ton of space up there. Those top cords of your trusses, it really depends on what you have or your rafters, but it usually ranges from 6 to 10 inches deep. It could go a little more, but when we're talking about throwing in insulation, you're usually having to push 12 plus inches thick to hit that R38 minimum. So that gets a little bit trickier. Now, there's a very cool thing on top of this that's much more common when you're doing that insulation against the roof deck, and that's with foam, or spray foam. So you have open and closed cell spray foam. Open cell foam, pretty similar R value to rock wool. It sits about R3 to R4 per inch. Fiberglass is like R2.5, R3, right about there. So again, like 25% better. So that's open cell. Closed cell, which is more expensive than open cell. Open cell is more expensive generally than bats are blown in, but it depends. Closed cell is really, really cool stuff, and that sits around like an R6 to R8 per inch. So double rock wool, double open cell. Again, does cost more. I wouldn't really know exactly how much more. I think it's around 30% or so more than open cell. Don't quote me on that. Do your research, talk to your contractor. But that stuff's really neat because you don't need to put in it too thick to get really high R values. So to show you that a little bit, do a closed cell spray foam roof deck. So that what it looks like roughly blown in is like this. It's this thick white snow, basically, that goes and seals the exterior. Now, another benefit to insulation isn't just, like I said, heat or the soundproofing, but it's actual weatherproofing. It's sealing. It's air sealing the home. So you're going to get a lot less air, dirty air, hot air flowing into the house through cracks and crevices left by insulation or blown in or bats. Blown in does a little bit better. It fills in some cracks, but bats, it's pretty susceptible to air leakage. But this will actually fill in most of those holes, which is pretty neat. So that helps, again, with heat, air quality in the home, and bugs as well. So if you're trying to cut down on bugs sneaking in, spray foam is the way to go. A lot of the time what you'll get is you'll run a few inches of spray foam, whether it's open or closed cell, against the roof deck and the walls, and then they'll add in like bats or blown in or whatever on the other side. And that's a good way to help insulate the home, seal the home as well, and just get a really high R value for the space. Very cool stuff. You see a lot of that kind of stuff on top of roofs as well, right? So great way to insulate on the outside. So those are a couple different ways of insulating the roof itself. To recap real quick, basic is blown-in insulation, some cellulose on top of the ceiling. If you want to go higher end, then use a closed cell insulation, probably 3 inches or so, and then follow up with either an open cell on top of that or rock wool. And if you run that, it gets really easy to hit double the insulation for the same thickness, or R value for the same thickness as a cheaper one would be. So for 6-7 inches thick, you could run into the same R value as 16 inches of cellulose blown in. So that's the way to go if you only have so much room up against the roof deck between the truss cords. So that's the way to go if you'd like. Now, another thing with that roof insulation real quick is if you think about how a truss sits on a wall plate, right? This isn't a good example because this is the good example I want to show on what you should do. Normally, these top cords for the truss, I don't know why I'm pointing, look at my mouse, but the top cord for the truss usually sits pretty much right up against the wall plate. Wall plate is the top of the wall right here where the truss rests, right? Bottom cord of the truss is here, top cord is here. Usually it rests against the bottom. Now, say you're running 16 inches thick of insulation. If you're running 16 inches, this bottom cord here, I'm actually not sure how thick it's showing. Bottom cord is about 4 inches, 3.5. So it's a 2x4 bottom cord shown here. This is 4 inches. We have to go 4 times as tall as that. I mean, we're talking insulation from here to here, basically, all packed in. Pretty standard. Problem is, clearly, it's not going to be an R38 here in the corners of the truss. Um, that's a problem, and that's how most homes are built. So we normally, if you end up taking or get an opportunity to take a thermal imaging camera, like a floor camera, you can attach to your phone or whatnot, and walk through your house and try to see where heat is leaking in, you'll see most of the heat leaking in generally around like windows and doors and corners, usually ceiling to wall to ceiling, because like I was just saying, there's a lot of heat that can still permeate here because there's not that thick of insulation. Kind of interesting. Anyways, a way around that is using what's called an energy heel truss. What this is, so it's a stub heel or raised heel truss. There's a lot of words for it. At the end of the day, it's raising that top cord a little bit taller using a little vertical block here to raise that truss. And now this is going to give us an extra couple of inches at least of space for insulation. If you're doing blown in or bats, go even taller than this one. I think this is only 8 inches or so. We rose this, like this piece. And so that's going to give us like 12, it's about a foot and change from here to the roof deck. I think we're almost 16 inches. It's probably about a foot, actually. Anyways, raise it up even higher, fill that all in. This home that we just barely completed, we were very focused on the energy side. I'll talk about the Zip-R panels, maybe in this video, maybe in a later one. But what he did is he is doing closed cell foam, like I talked about, that R6 to R8 per inch R value, very good spray foam insulation. And he's spraying that against the full roof deck and across this side. And then following up with an open cell insulation against that. And so it's going to be like 7 to 8 inches thick here all the way around the top, but it's going to give him a really high R value. It should sit, I think it's around, I mean, if we're, what, 3.5, he's right at that R38, like almost on the nose. Or he is R38, that's what we need to do. So anyways, that's what he's running all the way across, and it's going to be a lot thinner, and it's going to insulate the entire attic as well. So now he's got an air-conditioned space basically in the attic. Kind of nice. So that's important. These energy heel trusses are a great way to help cut down on any heat leakage into the house by adding in more insulation at those corners where heat leaks in. So now let's go down to the walls. I know the video's starting to get a little bit long. I mean, how long are we right now? I'm not sure. Anyways, so the wall insulation here, the most common, like the picture I'd shown earlier, is the fiberglass bats up against the wall like this. This is in most homes, very standard. Sometimes you won't actually see the pink. It'll be have the paper covering. So very normal. If you ever tear into your home, you'll probably notice that. I know our home, these walls all have that same thing. It does the job. It's fine. It's the bare minimum. It's cheap. There's a lot of air leakage that gets through. It works. So if you're looking for cheap, this is the way to go. That's what every standard builder uses. If you want to step up a little bit, you go to rock wool, like we had talked about, right? You go to this stuff. It's going to give you another 25% or so insulation per inch. So that's a great thing. I mean, if we're talking R19 for about 6 inches or so of fiberglass insulation bats, going up to a rock wool at the same thickness, I mean, we're pushing 27 potentially. So that's a big jump. That's a very good jump if we're talking R3 for 6 inches. Just to clarify as well, for those not familiar, a 2x4 is not 2 inches by 4 inches. It's actually 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches. 2x6, same thing. It's 1.5 inches by 5.5 inches. So when I'm saying 6 inches of rock wool, it's actually 5.5 inches. So anyways, our 15 rock wool is 3.5 inches. So if you have 2x4 walls on the exterior, not very common now. Used to build more with it in the past. But that's very normal for interior walls. Exterior is usually 2x6 to fit more insulation. But if it is a 2x4 wall, R13 is about as low as you ever go. But if you can go to R15 with rock wool. So anyways, if you want to get up to the mid-20s instead of R19, throw rock wool instead of fiberglass, pay a little bit extra, and be much more comfortable. Now, next step up from that is what, again, we did on this gentleman's home. What we ended up doing, let's see if I can grab a... okay, so here's kind of a dirty cross-section detail of this. What we ended up doing here is, first off, you've got, of course, drywall. He wanted to go thicker sheetrock, 5/8 inch all the way around. 1/2 inch drywall is standard. So we went a little bit thicker. It helps with noise dampening more than anything. And, of course, there's an extra 1/8 inch there, so sure, it helps with insulation. Minimal, but something. Then here what he did was 3.5 inch rock wool, so that R15 I had mentioned. So we're doing this, and obviously this is from inside out. And then he's going with closed cell insulation. So what we're doing is 2 inches of closed cell insulation up after the exterior sheathing is up of the home. So once the sheathing's all up, you're blowing in that spray foam to 2 inches, and then you're putting in the rock wool bats at 3.5 inches. That's pretty good. What that's actually doing is, if we're saying this is R14, right, 2 inches of R7, so it's R14 plus R15, we're R29 already. I mean, that's 10 over the standard for a 2x6 wall, R19. So that is awesome. You can see R19 minimum, right? And that's per code for the plan set. So this is awesome. This is a really neat way to get really good insulation on your walls without having to go with a thicker stud. That's always another option, is go to a 2x8 or 2x10 stud if you really want to go thick. It's very unnecessary when you can do this instead. The price difference wouldn't be that different. It would be a little bit, but anyways. So he did that, and then outside of that, to add even more, we're at an R32 roughly. So we're getting close to double the minimum code for his wall insulation. And a big thing for them is they're close to a large road, so they wanted it quieter. So this is going to help quiet down a lot of road noise, and obviously really cut down on that electrical bill and make it real comfortable inside. But what he did is, so to recap, 5/8 inch sheetrock drywall, R15 3.5 inch rock wool insulation bats, 2 inch closed cell, and then he's going to a Zip R R3 sheathing. Zip system is very cool. I will go into a video later about that. I did a quick little post this past Wednesday, just a picture of this house using the Zip system. But what this basically is your outside OSB, like kind of plywood sheathing that's on most homes. It's that, but attached to it in one piece is a weatherproofing material on the outside to fully air seal the home. And so it's that weatherproofing, like plastic almost, to that OSB. That's a 1/2 inch or 7/6. I don't remember the thickness of this one actually off the top of my head. It might be 7/16. But anyways, it's not 1/2 inch. It's 3/8 or 7/16. But it's the weatherproofing, the OSB, and then it's an inch of solid polyiso foam. So it's the insulation foam boards that you may have seen at Home Depot. So they're all basically one piece. The cool thing about that is it adds, as the name implies, Zip R R3 sheathing, it adds another R3 of insulation. So it's even more insulation. So you've got R3 from the Zip R, you've got R14 from the closed cell, you've got R15 from the rock wool. So we're R32 for this wall and about R38 up here. That is awesome. So this whole place is so well insulated and sealed. He's going with an extremely efficient air conditioning system that's very similar to a large ducted mini split. And so the air conditioning system itself can vary its speed, so that it's not running 100% or 0 all the time like most air conditioning units do. So that, again, is going to help cut down on his energy bill. I'm really excited to see how low his energy bill is for this home that's 3,500 plus square feet with a lot of tall ceilings. So this will be a pretty cool thing to see built. It'll be a real testament to how good insulation can get for not too much more money. So anyways, I'll go into more of the Zip R and benefits and whatnot in a later video. This video is getting very long. Let's cut it short. I mean, oh goodness, we're 23 minutes long. I know not everybody watches these, but hopefully somebody can get something from this and can learn a little bit about insulation. We'll do more videos taking out little snippets of this down the road. For now, thanks for listening. Insulation is a great thing. Again, the Mickey Mouse ears, don't mind them. It's for my daughter. It's her birthday, so tell her happy birthday. And any questions, please let me know. This is Ethan with Planned Right. Have a good one. Take care.